Randomizers are probably one of the most fun ways to play Pokemon. You can get anything from a literal legendary to a Pichu with Truant. Things like that are what makes this run extremely difficult, and just to keep it that way, I'm also going to be adding on the hardcore Nuzlocke rules that you see on screen now. Now, with all that out of the way, I start my journey as Zango and head on to go get my starter. The three choices I'm given for starter are Drifbloom, Spinarak, and Falafi. Now, I feel like Drifbloom is probably the best choice, but for some reason, I decided to go Spinarak. Unfortunately, because Spinarak is so weak, I ended up losing my first rival battle right away, so I had to restart, come back to this point, and this time I picked Drifbloom. With this Drifbloom, I beat up the Spinarak that I once chose, and I find out that my ability is actually Speed Boost, which is massive. With that, I say bye-bye to my mom, she says bon voyage, and I go to learn how to catch a Pokemon for about the billionth time in my life. I use this newfound knowledge to accidentally kill an Exploud, and then I continue forward into the game where I see Alder jump off this massive rock, which is like, he definitely twisted an ankle. Like at least one. Regardless, I push past him to make it to Flossie Ranch where I can get another encounter, this one being Wobbuffet. Wobbuffet with Drizzle could have been cool, I guess, but I ended up getting a crit anyways, so it doesn't even matter. With that, I make one final move where I go back to Route 20 and I'm actually able to catch a Pokemon, this one being a Sandshrew. While trying to catch Sandshrew, I find out it's got the ability Moody, which could be good or bad depending on the stat changes, I'm not sure. It doesn't take that long and eventually I catch him and give him the nickname Angry, and I also give my Drifbloom the nickname Envy. If any of you guys end up finding out what the nickname theme is, leave it in the comments down below. Continuing on into the story of the game though means I've got a rival battle, which I swiftly deal with because he's only got a Spinarak. This is also where I get my first glimpse of Team Plasma trying to steal a Herdier for whatever reason. Either way, he ends up giving me a TM that's randomized, and it ends up being Silverwind. Not that Silverwind is really great, but it can go on my Drifbloom, so I guess it's fine. Now I've got to go back towards the first city so I can fight my first gym, and on my way there, I dominate these little kids in a battle, and then I continue forward, meet Alder again, he gives me some orange berries, and I'm into the first city. This is where I can start my first gym battle against Charon, and he ends up leading this fight with Frillish as I bring out Envy. Against Frillish, I start out by going for a Seed Bomb, doing super effective damage, and taking it out with a one-shot, leading into the final Pokemon Ralts. With Ralts in, I go for an Earthquake, which I honestly expected to one-shot, but it leaves Ralts with a sliver remaining as he then sets up an Iron Defense. Ralts then gets healed by a potion, but at this point it's really too late as just two more Earthquakes finish off Ralts and get me my first badge. With that badge acquired, I walk out of the gym and I end up getting the TM Judgment, which is huge. That's a great move. I also end up getting my C gear, but I don't really know what that does, and I've never known, so it's cool, I guess. On my way to Burbank City, I ended up running into a Landorus, which was really scary. Eventually, though, I was able to take down its HP without losing a Pokemon, which is really nice, as now I get to go to Burbank City. Basically, right when I get into Burbank, I see Roxy yell out, "You dim-witted, dense, dumb, daft, dippy, dorky, doltish doofus," which is honestly bars. Whoever she was yelling at definitely ran away crying, and after going to the Burbank complex and finding basically nothing I want, I decide to go heal up my team and get ready to fight Roxy. While I'm in the Pokemon Center, I end up talking to one of the guys who sells stuff, and I find out that he has free Master Balls. Now, I could have taken this opportunity and bought a bunch of free Master Balls, but honestly, I thought it was a little bit cheap, so I decided to just not buy any at all. Let me know what you guys would have done in the comments, but I'm pretty sure I made the right decision, as catching every single Pokemon 100% of the time kind of just seems a little unfair. Moving past that though, in my fight with Roxy, she leads with Cloyster as I bring out Drifbloom. Against Cloyster, I start out by going for a Seed Bomb that does a little over a third as I then get hit for not too much damage by a Smackdown. On the next turn, I land another Seed Bomb, bring Cloyster down into the red as I get hit by a second Smackdown, taking it down to 35 remaining. Cloyster then gets healed on the following turn, but it doesn't really matter as a couple more Seed Bombs take out Cloyster, leaving me with 13 HP into Metapod. For this, I made a simple switch into Angry as this thing ended up getting an Omni Boost, which was really scary, but either way, after a couple of gear grinds, it goes down, and I win my second badge. After this gym battle, we're now on to the funnest part in any Pokemon game, and that's Pokestar Studios. Honestly, it's pretty admirable how badly these guys can craft a movie. Just look at the audience, basically everybody's asleep. Regardless, after finally leaving there and wasting about 10 minutes of my life, I end up fighting a lot of Team Plasma before I can finally make it into Castelia City. In Castelia, the first thing I do is go into the sewers, which is honestly a little weird of me, but it's fine, I guess. After messing around in there for a little bit, I end up finding myself a Crawdaunt, which originally I thought was a really cool encounter, and after I caught it, I forgot to give it a nickname, so I can't even use it in this run. After I realized that big mistake, I end up taking out my anger on Team Plasma, beat them in a fight, and move on to my other two encounters that I can find down here. After going into Relic Passage, I ended up finding myself a Latios, which is huge and makes me really wish I bought those Master Balls. Unfortunately enough for me, in the end, this Latios is doing just too much damage for me to out-heal, so I've gotta kill it and move on to my next encounter. This next one was in this small little city park, and it was a Rhyperior, and this thing I can actually catch. Eventually, after it gets off a couple of dragon dances, I catch it and give it the nickname Joy. Now I head towards the gym where I evolve Angry into a Bisharp, which is honestly pretty huge. Moody Bisharp is gonna be absolutely fire for... Oh, what the... Sorry about that, guys. It'll never happen again. Bisharp is going to be a really good Pokemon for the team, and now I'm ready to go challenge the third gym leader, Robin, which I honestly feel like is a better name than Bird. He leads this fight with Tynamo as I end up bringing out Angry. The first thing I do is start out by going for a Gear Grind that's not very effective, but still brings Tynamo down into the red. Tynamo then hits me with a Tickle, which doesn't really do much as he gets healed in the next turn, and I go for an Egg Bomb and miss. On the next turn, I end up landing an Egg Bomb, but it only brings Tynamo down to about a third remaining, so on the next turn, I just decide to switch before getting tickled anymore. Once Drifloon is in, I get to go for an Earthquake, which finally kills this Tynamo and brings out the next Pokemon, Jinx. Jinx being an Ice type is a little bit worrying for Envy, but it doesn't really matter too much as I kind of just assumed it didn't have any Ice moves. Thankfully for me, this assumption was correct, and after a couple of Earthquakes, Jinx goes down, bringing out the final Pokemon, Gible. For Gible, I make a quick switch into Rhyperior and slowly dwindle down its HP by going for a combination of Clamp and Bulldoze. Honestly, I don't even think this Gible has any attacking moves, and it doesn't hit me for anything at all as eventually it goes down and gets me my third badge. Moving on to Route 4 means I've got another encounter, and this one ended up being a Suicune, which again really makes me regret my decision. I end up realizing pretty early on that Suicune is not going to get caught, so I've got to run away yet again, missing out on another legendary. On my way into Nimbasa City, I end up running into this group of people who say subscribe. It's pretty spaced out, but they say subscribe, and it's spelt wrong. I didn't even notice that till literally just now. That's crazy. Should still sub though, even though I can't spell. Regardless, now that I'm in Nimbasa, I can go get some Great Balls so I can head back out to the desert resort and get another encounter. In this place, I ended up finding myself a Mienshao, which would have been really nice to have if it didn't immediately die to a critical hit Gear Grind. This encounter leads me on into the Relic Castle where I find myself a Machop that I finally am able to catch, and I nickname Sadness because nobody really wants a Machop. Now that I've got him, I get to go back into Nimbasa City, but there's a bunch of encounters I can get here, so I'm kind of just gonna speed run them real quick. In Route 5, I ended up running into a Squirtle that I caught and nicknamed Surprise. I ended up evolving this Squirtle into a Sableye, which is a pretty bad surprise. In these final two places that I could access, I ran into a Shiftry and a Hitmontop, and both of these Pokemon ended up dying to an Acrobatics because I really didn't want them. Now, with all of that finally out of the way, I run into these two people who are on a first date, and this guy doesn't know what to talk about, and this girl hates that he just plays guitar. Thankfully for me, looking at this failed first date isn't the only thing I can do here, as I can go challenge the fourth gym. On my way there, I evolve Sadness into Celio, then start my fight with Webster for my fourth badge. She leads with her Skitty as I lead with Drifloon. Skitty's not really that great of a Pokemon, so it just goes down to two simple Earthquakes as the next Pokemon to come out is Marowak. Against Marowak, I start out by going for a Seed Bomb that does nearly half as I then get hit by a Rock Wrecker that does a ton of damage to me, bringing me down to 38 remaining. Because I know Rock Wrecker is going to cause Marowak to recharge, I decide to go for yet another Seed Bomb in the next turn that brings Marowak down into the red. On the following turn, Marowak gets healed as I then go for yet another Seed Bomb to bring Marowak down to almost half, and at this point, I've got to switch out, so I move into Angry. Angry was easily able to tank a Rock Wrecker, and on the following turn, I'm able to finish off Marowak with a Gear Grind, leading into the final Pokemon, Castform. Now, originally, I didn't think Castform would be too much of a problem, but it starts out by going for a Cross Chop, which luckily I avoid, but if that would have landed, it would have definitely killed me. Luckily, I ended up avoiding that, and I was able to get off a Gear Grind, which brought Castform down to about half after the Citrus Berry, and -2 defense because of weak armor. At this point, though, I've definitely got to switch out, so I move into Joy, who tanks a super effective Cross Chop, and after that, I'm simply able to go for a couple more moves, finishing off Castform and winning myself my fourth badge. With that gym finished up, I've got to fight a little bit of Team Plasma with my rival, and since they're kind of a pushover, I just make my way past them onto the Driftveil Drawbridge? That's a lot of D's. Whoa. On this bridge, I find myself a Blaziken with Sandstream, which would have been a pretty nice addition to the team, but its Sandstorm ends up killing itself, which really does suck. Regardless, the next stop is Driftveil City, and this place has the best Pokemon music in the entire franchise. I don't want to hear it. Don't at me. As I'm bumping my way through there, I find myself on Route 6, where I catch a Doduo. This Doduo I nicknamed Disgust, and it actually evolves right away. It ends up evolving into a Beartic, which honestly is kind of cool. As I'm making the rounds leveling up a bunch of my Pokemon, my Celio ends up learning the move Roar of Time, which is a really crazy move to have. It's after this that I go and test out a few of my new moves on Team Plasma, and I get a little cocky here. Well, maybe not cocky, I guess, but definitely a little unlucky as I make a switch from my Drifloon into Bisharp. I honestly shouldn't have made this move anyways, as Breloom has Fighting Stab, so it wouldn't have been good regardless, but I did it, and I ended up dying to a V-Create. A pretty rough way to lose my moody Bisharp. It honestly does suck, but thankfully, this Pokemon gets immediately replaced by N's Pokemon, which is a Lilligant. I don't think it was a really fair trade, but it is what it is now I've just gotta head towards the 5th gym. Once I get inside here, I make my way towards Clay, but it's completely pitch black, so it was a lot harder than it should have been. I don't know who turned off the lights, but that was really annoying, but eventually I made it to Clay and started my 5th gym battle. He led the fight with Leavanny as I ended up leading with Drifloon. Leavanny is probably one of the worst Pokemon I could have gone up against with Drifloon, so I immediately make a switch out into Beartic, but not before getting hit by a Pursuit. This thing did over half to me, but thankfully it causes my Beartic not to take any damage on the switch in. Once Beartic is in, I'm able to get off 2 Chatters to finish off Leavanny, bringing out the next Pokemon, Jirachi. Against Jirachi, I tried to get off a Glare, but it didn't matter as he ended up getting off a critical hit self-destruct, which absolutely dominated my Beartic. Thankfully for me though, he's on to his final Pokemon, Scolipede, and at this point I just bring in Joy, go for a couple of Dragon Dances and Bulldozes until eventually Scolipede goes down and I finally win my 5th badge. That right there was a pretty rough fight, and I'm not gonna lie to you, this city has taken way more Pokemon than it's worth. The music may be good, but it's not that good. I gotta get out of here. To do that, I've gotta go through this Driftvale tournament thing, and I completely destroy it as I'm way over leveled for it, but it doesn't really matter as next up is more Team Plasma. These guys don't have a V-Create Breloom though, so they're a lot easier to take care of, and next up is Chargestone Cave. In this cave, I can actually get an encounter, and it's actually a Badoo, which is pretty solid, and I give it the nickname Happy because it can evolve. Going through the rest of Chargestone is a breeze, and I eventually make it into Mistralton City where I get myself a Master Ball. This could be huge and totally could make up for the Master Balls that I sold on way earlier in the run. Now guys, I'm just playing. I end up going on to the next route and wasting my Master Ball on a Swoobat that I'm pretty sure I don't even use throughout the whole run. So yeah, that was good. Basically, immediately after that encounter, I end up running into a Tornadus, which would have been really nice to have instead of a Swoobat. It's whatever though, I make my mistakes, it is what it is. Now I evolve my Badoo into a Grovyle, and then my Grovyle into a Lucario, which is actually good, and it does make me happy. Once all that is over with, I'm actually able to move on immediately to the 6th gym and get my fight started with Skyla. She leads the fight with Cinccino as I ended up leading with Happy. Cinccino started out by hitting me with a Torment as I then set up a Hone Claws, bringing up my accuracy and attack stat. On the next turn, Cinccino goes for a charge, which doesn't do that much as I just get off an Earthquake, doing about 2/3. On the following turn, I'd like to KO with another Earthquake, but I can't because of that Torment, so I have to go for a Spore. And on top of all that, Cinccino's faster than me, so it gets off a Heat Wave before my Spore, and it brings me down to 55 HP. Finally though, after Cinccino's been put to sleep, I'm able to take her down with another Earthquake, as this brings out the next Pokemon, Plusle. Plusle is pretty easily taken down by a Phantom Force, as the last Pokemon to come in is Frostlass. I honestly didn't really expect Frostlass to be able to do that much damage to me, and thankfully I was right, as it hits me with a Fire Fang, but it doesn't actually kill. This then allows me to get off a Spore, then a Shadow Force, OHKOing Frostlass, winning me my 6th badge. With that badge, I'm now able to steal Skyla's private jet and head off into the sunset to Reversal Mountain. In this whole area, I have about 3 encounters that I can get, and I only recorded one of them that I accidentally ran away from. I promise, I'm a good YouTuber, guys. Regardless, after missing those 3 encounters, I found myself on the next route where there's a Serperior. This Serperior took forever to catch, but eventually it did get in the ball, and I gave it the nickname Shy. I then was able to evolve my Celio into a Ludicolo, which honestly, I really wish wasn't a Ludicolo. All this does is lead me into my next rival battle where I'm able to absolutely annihilate him due to my Drifloon. Honestly, I ended up getting a really good luck of the draw with my moveset, and Drifloon ended up learning the move Belly Drum. This is super good for Drifloon because not only does it have a lot of health, but it also has the move Recover, so any health that I lose because of Belly Drum, I can just heal up. And with my ability being Speed Boost, I'm basically faster than anything at the field at all times, so I'm easily able to sweep my rival and continue on into Route 13. After speeding through that route, I find myself in this little town where I've got to fight a little bit more Team Plasma, but they're kind of easy right now, so I'm not too worried about it. Later on though, the teams that they'll have will get progressively harder since they'll have more and more Pokemon, so I'm actually really worried for those fights. Either way, as I was making my way towards Opalucid, I ended up finding this man who was a 999 win streak. Now I could give this old guy the win and let him bask in his 1000 win glory, but I've got a YouTube channel and I've got a Nuzlocke to win, so I absolutely destroy him in a battle, and he says that he'll try again sometime. I hate to break it to you, champ, but I don't think you've got the lifespan to win another 1,000 battles. Regardless, now I'm actually able to go to Opaloosa City, and once I make it here, I decide to sit a little bit and level up my team. While I'm doing that, I encounter this Virizion that's not actually a Virizion, it's a Petalil. Honestly, that's close enough though, it's basically Hisui and Lilligant. I ended up just running away from it as I don't need any more XP, and I'm pretty much ready to challenge the 7th gym leader, Drayden. He leads the fight with a Rotom Freeze as I lead with Lucario. With Lucario, I start out by going for an Earthquake, doing about 2/3 as Rotom Freeze then goes for a Dig. Now after this Dig, I decided to switch out into Drifloon for whatever reason. I could have just stayed in and gone for another Earthquake, as with Drifloon, I ended up going for an Earthquake anyways. This Earthquake didn't even end up connecting with Rotom Freeze as he got swapped out for a Victory Bell. Just a little bit of a misplay by me, but it doesn't really matter too much, as with Drifloon, I'm able to just go for 2 more Earthquakes and Victory Bell and it takes him down. Now the second to last Pokemon, Scolipede, gets sent in, and against Scolipede, I immediately start out by going for a Belly Drum. This Belly Drum maximizes my attack stat as Scolipede then hits me with a Flash Cannon, but it doesn't do enough damage to kill, so this battle is just over. An Earthquake on Scolipede and an Earthquake on Rotom Freeze is enough to win me this fight and get myself my 7th badge. Right when I get the gym finished, I walk outside and I witness Team Plasma absolutely light up Opaloosa City. These ice crystals are everywhere, and eventually I make my way through them to fight a bunch of Team Plasma members. Once I finish all of them off, I end up getting this DNA Splicer, and this DNA Splicer is apparently super important, so they give it to a teenager? Of course, because I'm just a kid, this thing gets immediately stolen from me, and it makes you think, why would they give it to me in the first place? Honestly, I can't really do anything about that, so what I decide to do is just simply go to Undella Town and get myself ready to challenge the 8th and final gym of this run. Technician Jill ends up leading this fight with his Scavalier as I bring out Ludicolo. Because Ludicolo essentially does no damage to a Scavalier, I make a simple switch out into Joy, who gets hit by an Egg Bomb on the switch in. On the following turn, I go for a Bulldoze, expecting it to do a little bit more, but it doesn't do that much as I then get hit by a Triple Kick, and that kinda scares me. With this fear, I decide to quickly switch into Drifloon, who doesn't take any damage by a Triple Kick, and in the next turn, I set up a Belly Drum. This Belly Drum, of course, maxes my attack stat in exchange for half of my health, and this Scavalier decided to go for a Blast Burn, which definitely had me sweating a little bit. It only brought me down to 42, so on the next turn, I decided to go for a Recover as Excavalier recharges, and on the following turn, I'm able to finish off Excavalier with an Earthquake. This battle is definitely over now as I'm at +6 attack and constantly gaining speed, so Mightyena easily gets one-shotted by an Earthquake, and the same happens for Lunatone. This pretty easily gets me my final badge and leads me on to a bunch of Team Plasma stuff. The first thing I do is move on to the next route where I get another encounter. For this encounter, I actually got really lucky and ended up finding myself a Thundurus. Thankfully, unlike all the other legendaries, I was actually able to catch this one and I gave it the nickname Sleepy. Now, continuing on into the game just a little bit, I end up using Colress's machine to get this Crustle out of the way, which ends up being a Roselia. I don't really need any more Pokemon on the team though, so I kind of just move straight past that onto the Team Plasma ship where I've got to fight a bunch of Team Plasma members. I went through with what I felt like was 100 of these guys until eventually I made it all the way to the end and just simply got kicked off the ship. With that though, it's time for the actual hard part of Team Plasma, and that's the giant chasm. Once I manage to get on the ship again, I've got to guess at this password like 40 times until eventually I get it correct, because there's no way you're catching me going through this puzzle. I've then got to fight with Zinzlin, which I honestly wrap up pretty quickly, but next is my fight with Colress, and this one's definitely going to be a little harder. Colress has 5 Pokemon, which is more than I've ever faced up until this point. The first Pokemon he brings out is Hariyama, and Hariyama has Mirror Coat, so it does massive damage to Sleepy after I go for a Scald. This leaves me with 14 remaining, so I've obviously got to switch out, and I move into Drifbloom. Drifbloom tanks a Metal Claw, but it gets a critical hit and raises Hariyama's attack stat. It's all good though, because it doesn't really matter as I can go for a Fly and finish off Hariyama's remaining health, leading into Exploud. Against Exploud, I switch out into Superior, who immediately gets hit by a Head Smash. This Head Smash does about a third to me, as on the next turn, I end up going for a Cross Chop that's super effective and brings Exploud down into the red. After another Head Smash, Exploud is left with a Sliver remaining, and on the following turn, he gets healed up. After the heal, I went for a Leaf Blade that brought Exploud to almost half, but at this point, I don't really want Superior taking any more damage, so I just switch out into Joy. Joy is able to finish off Exploud with 2 Bulldozes as the next Pokemon to come in is Roserade, and I'm a little bit worried here, but I think I'll be fine. Roserade comes out swinging with an Aqua Tail, but because it's a Roserade, it doesn't really do as much as I would have thought. This means that I'm able to finish off Roserade with a pair of Bulldozes, and this leads into the 4th Pokemon, Jirachi. Jirachi is a little worrying, so I switch into Lucario and start out by going for an Earthquake that does a little over half. On the next turn, Jirachi goes for a Sacred Sword, which really scared me, because if it would have crit, it definitely would have killed my Lucario. Either way though, we're all good as I'm able to get off yet another Earthquake, finishing off Jirachi and bringing out the ace Pokemon, Ursaring. Ursarang's pretty easy to defeat, as all I've got to do is bring out my Lilligant and start to spam surf until eventually it goes down. That gets me my victory over Colress, but I'm not out of the woods yet, as I've still got a potentially run-ending fight against Ghetsis. The first thing I've got to do is go up against his Kyurem, which ended up being a Zualis that has Imposter, so it's actually a Rhyperior, I guess. Because I've got Power Whip on my Rhyperior, I decided to go for that. It gets an easy one-shot, and I'm now on to Performer Jessica. This fight ended up being way easier than anticipated, as I mainly just set up a lot with Dragon Dance. The first thing that he brings out is Snorlax, as I lead with Rhyperior once again. Snorlax really did take forever to go down, but that's because I just set up a bunch of Dragon Dances on him. I noticed pretty early on that he just wasn't going to attack me, so I decided to set up 5 Dragon Dances. Once you're at +5 attack and +5 speed, it's kind of just a solved battle, so after spamming a bunch of different moves, I eventually finished off Ghetsis and won my final battle against Team Plasma. After this fight, N goes on his whole spiel about how he's his father, and then this, that, the third. I wasn't really listening. I'm just ready to go to Victory Road. Once I get here, I make quick work of my rival with just Belly Drum Driftbloom, and after that, I make it to the Pokemon League. Now, all I've got to do is get my team set, brought up to the level cap, and get ready to fight the Elite Four. For this Elite Four journey, I decide to start by going up against Shauntal. She leads the fight with a Dragonite, as I start out with Driftbloom. Against Dragonite, I immediately make a switch into Thundurus, who tanks a Brave Bird, doing about half. This activates my static ability and causes Dragonite to get paralyzed. At this point, after the recoil damage from Brave Bird, I assumed I'd kill with Glaciate, so I go for that, and it takes Dragonite down to a sliver remaining. This then leads into Dragonite breaking through my paralysis and landing a Blizzard, which obviously takes out my Thundurus. Honestly, that was a pretty bad string of luck there, considering that I probably would have killed with a higher damage roll. It's alright though, I guess, because now I get a free switch back into Driftbloom, where I can then go for a Belly Drum because I know that Gentleman Jasmine is gonna heal. Once she does, it's absolutely grits, as I'm +6 attack and I'm getting constant speed boosts. This means I can slowly take down her team with a combination of Fly and Earthquake, and that ends up winning me my first Elite Four battle. This next one's up against Grimsley, or otherwise known as Gentleman Daniel. He has possibly one of the most annoying Pokemon in this entire game, as he leads with Cofagrigus. I started out with my superior with Shadow Ball, so I figured this fight would be fine, but I was totally wrong. The first thing I do is go for a super effective Shadow Ball that does about 1/3, as Cofagrigus then sets up a Trick Room. Now, if you don't know what Trick Room does, it's the most annoying thing ever, especially when you're going up against a Cofagrigus. On top of that though, it starts to set up a bunch of Cosmic Powers, which raises both its defense and special defense stat. This means that every turn, I'm doing less and less damage until eventually Cofagrigus gets down into the red, where he just gets healed up. I started to go for Leaf Blades, as there's a higher crit chance with that move, but I got no luck, as eventually I had to switch out because I got hit by so many Focus Blasts. At 10 HP, I finally make the right decision and switch into Envy and go for a Belly Drum. While I went for this Belly Drum, Cofagrigus ended up switching out into Zoroark, but it really doesn't matter, as after I get off that free Belly Drum, I basically just win the fight. Zoroark, Gastrodon, Scolipede, and Cofagrigus all go down to a combination of Earthquake and Fly, and that wins me my second Elite Four battle. Now, it's at this point in the game where I took a massive break from this run. Now, there's a lot of reasons why I took this break. One of them is because college is hard, and the other is that I needed to record another Shiny Only video. That one should be out soon. But that's besides the point. What I'm trying to say is that I really didn't remember what the Pokemon I had on my team even were. This means that going into these final 3 battles, I lost a lot of the knowledge I once had that was built up in this randomizer. You'll know what I mean a bit later, but regardless, the next one up is Caitlyn. She leads this fight with Thundurus, as I lead with Joy. With Joy, I started out by going for a bunch of Dragon Dances. I ended up being able to set up about 5 before Thundurus did any real damage to me. At +5 attack, Thundurus stood no chance to his strength, and the next Pokemon to come out was Braviary. Unfortunately, I moved slower than Braviary because I got paralyzed by static. This means that Braviary is able to get off a clamp, which does big damage because it's 4 times super effective. Either way, I luckily break through paralysis and I'm able to get off another strength, which ends up finishing off Braviary with a one-shot. Next up is Scizor, who starts out by going for a Worry Seed for some reason. Either way, it easily allows me to take him out with a Bulldoze, as the last Pokemon out is Kabutops. Now, this Pokemon is really ugly, and I wanted to do the most damage possible to try to kill it, and so for some reason, I decided to go for a Power Whip. This could have been an extremely dumb move, as I ended up getting hit by a Sweet Kiss, which confused me, but luckily, I got bailed out by my paralysis. Not wanting to lose this fight, I decided to take my head out of the gutter and switch into Superior and just simply go for a Leaf Blade, finishing off Kabutops and getting my 3rd Elite Four battle down. For this next one against Marshall, I decided to go back to my tried and true formula of just sending in Driftbloom. He leads with Sableye, and I start out by going for a Belly belly drum as Sableye goes for a safeguard. On the next turn, Sableye hits me with a shadow sneak, but at this point it's way too late for that, as I'm able to get off a +6 earthquake, easily one-shotting Sableye in the process. Next up is going to be Lilligant, who gets hit by a fly, which is super effective, so it obviously kills, and then the same thing happens with Trophius. The last Pokemon to come out is then Bronzong, but Bronzong is weak to earthquake, and because it doesn't have levitate because it's a randomizer, it easily goes down, and that wins me my final Elite Four battle. Now, with all of that out of the way and the rest of the run behind us, I move on to fight Nurse Forest in my final battle of this run. She ended up leading this fight with Archeops as I led with Superior. Against Archeops, I start out by going for a Cross Chop, which immediately gets a critical hit and brings Archeops down to about a third remaining. He then gets off a Shell Smash, so on the next turn he's faster than me and is able to get off an Uproar, bringing me down to 78 remaining. Thankfully, I'm easily able to finish off his remaining health with a Leaf Blade, as next in is Electros. Electros is a pretty scary Pokemon, so I decide to make a switch into Rhyperior, assuming I'm gonna get hit by like a flamethrower or something, and it decides to just straight up go for Explosion. This ended up being the perfect switch, as that explosion was a critical hit and probably would have killed any of my other Pokemon. With that comes in another Archeops, so I decided to stay in, and I ended up getting immediately killed by a Leaf Storm, which wasn't that great, but it does give me a free switch into my Lilligant. Lilligant is the perfect switch here, as I'm able to go for an Icy Wind to lower Archeops' speed, so that on the next turn I outspeed and I'm able to go for a Surf that takes him down. This then leads into the fourth Pokemon, Quillfish, and since Quillfish really isn't that great of a Pokemon, it easily goes down to a couple of Solar Beams. Unfortunately enough for me though, it does get off a Perish Song, which means I have to switch out when the next Pokemon, Cofagrigus, comes in. This thing is the bane of my existence, and you remember how I said earlier how I lost a lot of the knowledge in this run? Yeah, I didn't remember any of the moves this thing had. So smart old me decided to switch into my Lucario, who immediately got his dimensions twisted on the switch in, and on the next turn got blasted by a Focus Blast, which obviously one-shotted. Knowing that Cofagrigus has Focus Blast, I decide to move into Envy, assuming that I can't take any damage from it. But then I find out Cofagrigus also has Charge Beam. Unfortunately, this means my Drifloon is definitely gonna die here, because I decided to go for a Belly Drum, and I don't have enough HP to survive a second Charge Beam. This means my Drifloon is gonna go down, and this puts me in an extremely bad spot. Thankfully for me, this battle ended up taking a turn, as I ended up switching into Lilligant. On the first turn, my Lilligant gets nailed by a Focus Blast. It takes me all the way down to 36 HP, but I do get off a Surf, which does about a third. Thankfully, it's on that same turn that Cofagrigus ends up running out of Trick Room turns, which allows me to go for yet another Surf, and because I outspeed, I'm able to take out Cofagrigus. Thankfully, that thing is finally out of my hair, and I'm finally on to the last Pokemon, Honchkrow. Against Honchkrow, I start out by going for an Icy Wind, which does about half, as I then get taken down by a Stone Edge. Thankfully, I have one Pokemon remaining, and that's Superior. With Superior, I start by going for a Judgment, which brings Honchkrow really low, and I'm not sure if this is Heal Range or not. Honchkrow then hits me with a Stone Edge that nearly kills me. It brings me down to 13 remaining. Now at this point, I've got to make a decision, because I'm not really sure if Honchkrow's in heal range or not. So what I decide to do is get a little bit risky, and I go for a Cross Chop. Now the plus side to this move is that it has a really high crit chance, so if Honchkrow heals, I likely can kill with another Cross Chop if it crits. The downside to this move is that it can miss, like really often. Regardless, I decide to press A on Cross Chop, and thankfully it ends up landing, killing the Honchkrow, and winning me my final battle of this run. Thank you all for watching. If you liked this video, consider subscribing and leaving a like, as it really does help out the channel. With that, I'll see you guys in the next one.